It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I am Geoff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch each Wednesday morning at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. It's time to wrap up the journey through 4 all-time memorable serials from my favorite of all the Doctor Who leads, classic or otherwise, Jon Pertwee, the third Doctor. What better way to wrap this theme month up than to talk about the grand send-off for Pertwee as the Doctor, Planet of the Spiders. Now, the initial direction of season 11 was intended to go differently. The final serial would have been called The Final Game and was to feature the last story and death of the Doctor's greatest nemesis, the Master. The Master, who we talked about during, a little bit when I covered the 8th season serial, The Daemons, was a renegade Time Lord and really was intended to be the primary villain of the third Doctor and wouldn't return to the series for quite some time after his last appearance. But he was originally played by veteran actor Roger Delgado. Now, sadly, Delgado was killed while shooting a miniseries in Turkey just 5 days before the airing of the final part of The Green Death, the serial we talked about last week. Now, while he was not featured in any of that serial, the Master was to feature somewhat heavily in the 11th season, if only for the final story. And I'll talk a little bit more about what this would lead to and the end of Jon Pertwee's run on Doctor Who before the end of this episode. Now, what's interesting about this serial is that last week's episode, where I discussed the Green Death, serves as a bit of a prologue to Planet of the Spiders. In that serial, the Doctor makes a quick trip to Metebelis 3, only to find an inhospitable but he plucked a blue crystal from the planet before returning to UNIT. That crystal would be gifted to Jo, his previous companion, as a wedding gift. But this time, a bunch of the serial takes place on Metebelis 3 and the result of what those blue crystals can do to creatures that now inhabit the planet. Now, one more thing that I do want to talk about before jumping into this serial proper. This story not only serves as a follow-up to the whole adventure on Metebelis 3, but it also serves as a conclusion to another story that tied back to Jo as well. Now, when Jo joined the show in season 8, another member of UNIT made his first appearance too, Captain Mike Yates. Now, Yates and Jo were at times shown to be sweet on each other. It was almost as if Yates was specifically brought into the show to be that kind of potential love interest for Jo, while the Doctor served as a father figure. Now, at times we saw Jo and Mike go on dates and such, but with Jo leaving to marry Clifford, it seemed as though Mike Yates really kind of no longer had the same purpose as before. Now, the second serial in this 11th season was Invasion of the Dinosaurs. And in that serial, Mike Yates got mixed up with the organization that was behind the whole dinosaur thing to return the Earth to something of a golden age. Now, while the general who convinced Mike to join him is court-martialed, Mike was allowed to take a leave where he will eventually quietly resign from UNIT. And that seemed to be a kind of sad end for Mike, who was intertwined with Jo, who was just no longer on the show either. But with that, let's get caught in the web of Jon Pertwee's final story, Planet of the Spiders, and bid a fond farewell to my favorite of all versions of the Doctor. Now, I definitely wanted to bring up that bit about Mike Yates because Planet of the Spiders opens with Yates on the grounds of a New Age Tibetan meditation center out in the country in England. He overhears some of the other people studying / practicing there, doing this kind of strange incantation in the cellar. Now, the man who leads this group is named Lupton. And after being scared by a spider in a web, Mike runs off, and that seemingly interrupts this incantation just as a blue light was bringing something over to our world. Lupton knows it's Yates who interrupted this because they can hear his car driving off outside, and he's the only one there that owns a car. I also want to bring up the actor who plays Lupton, which unfortunately I didn't put in my notes here. He was actually the voice of Boss, the evil computer in The Green Death. So nice little return for that guy. But yeah, that voice, once you hear it, you'll recognize it if you've seen both of the episodes. But Yates eventually tells the Doctor's new companion and reporter, Sarah Jane Smith, and brings her to this meditation center to basically snoop around to see if UNIT should get involved or not. He doesn't want to take it directly to the Doctor and the Brigadier because, as he puts it, the last time they saw him, he was holding a gun to them. But elsewhere, the Doctor and the Brigadier have gotten in contact with someone who claims to be a psychic. Now, the Doctor has recently developed an interest in this field, and they bring this guy to UNIT, where this guy who has the title of professor reveals that he's really just a performer and neither clairvoyant, psychic, nor a professor. However, the Doctor claims the man is actually an astute psychic. The Doctor spotted this because the guy gave answers before he noticed the man's assistant on stage giving him the signal for the answer. Now, this quote-unquote professor, Mr. Clegg, has even developed the power of psychokinesis, which he demonstrates for the Doctor and the Brigadier. He even takes items from the two men, like the Brigadier's watch from a past romantic escapade, and the Doctor's sonic screwdriver, where he sees it being used in fantastical ways, and tells them about it. In fact, he tells them things that neither person would have told the other or would have certainly revealed to this guy. But when a package arrives from Jo while she's out in the Amazon with Clifford Jones, Clegg is able to see that it is indeed the blue crystal from Metebelis 3 that the Doctor gifted Jo when she was engaged to be married. Sadly, as Clegg looks into the glowing light of the crystal while the Doctor reads of the various mishaps Jo has had from the superstitious people that kind of feel like that crystal is bad juju, the psychic powers of the crystal combined with Mr. Clegg's own powers causes the man's mind to completely shut down and kills him. Back at the meditation center, a snooping Mike and Sarah Jane spy on Lupton and his men as they try another incantation, but this time they are successful in summoning a pretty large spider. As the others recoil and try to run away from the giant spider, the spider uses an electrical beam to knock one of the men unconscious. And then the spider then tells Lupton that she has come to give him the power that he seeks. She leaps onto his back and merges into him, allowing him to have great powers and allows her to speak through him. Now, back at UNIT, the Doctor gets an idea that spiders are kind of involved with all of this, with something that has to do with this whole story and all the stuff going on with the crystal and the meditation center, because Clegg was attached to a machine that was recording images of his thoughts. Now, those thoughts, of course, are giant spiders. The Doctor then decides that he needs to gaze into the crystal himself to try to figure all this out. But back at the meditation center, Mike tells Sarah Jane to go get the Doctor and Brigadier, and he's going to talk to the Tibetan abbot Kanpo. Now, he runs this center, and Mike really wants to tell him what they saw. Now, what exactly brought the spider to Earth? Well, it's that very blue crystal that the Doctor has. Concentrating with Lupton, she figures out that the crystal is at UNIT. And the Doctor learns about the giant spider from Sarah Jane and becomes pretty interested in knowing all about it. But Lupton has snuck onto the unit campus, and he looks into the doctor's lab and sees the crystal, and the spider helps Lupton teleport the crystal into his hands. And this leads to a giant chase. Lupton jumps into a futuristic-looking car that the doctor has on the base there that he's built, and he even tells the brigadier to stop shooting at it because he'll damage the car. But then the doctor gives chase in a gyrocopter from the air, while the brigadier, good old Sergeant Benton, and Sarah Jane follow in the doctor's jalopy Bessie. So the land chase via automobiles ends when Lupton abandons the doctor's futuristic car, only for him to then steal the gyrocopter. The doctor gets into his futuristic car and shows off that it can also fly. Once the gyrocopter runs out of fuel, the doctor then chases Lupton by water when Lupton takes off on a motorboat, and the doctor goes in hot pursuit in a hovercraft. When the doctor finally catches up to Lupton on the motorboat, the spider has called upon help from her sisters on Metebelis 3 to teleport him off the boat. Now, Lupton then returns to the meditation center with the help of that sneaky teleportation from his spider buddy, and then he's spotted by the slow-witted Tommy, who lives at the center and is looked after by the abbot and the Lama Choji. Now, he likes pretty things, Tommy, and he sees the blue crystal in Lupton's hand and decides that, boy, he really likes that. But more on that in a bit. Lupton's spider makes connection with her sisters on Metebelis 3, and we learn that the whole plot. Basically, they all serve their leader, who they call the Great One. Now, the Great One has collected all the blue crystals on Metebelis 3, and now Lupton has the only one that is missing for this grand plan of theirs. So she needs that so the spiders can return to their home world of Earth to conquer it. Now, Lupton falls asleep, and the spider separates herself from him and sneaks by the room where the doctor, Sarah Jane, and Mike are talking to Choji about Lupton having stolen that blue crystal from the doctor. Now, speaking of the blue crystal, Lupton and Tommy, Lupton tells his friend and goon Barnes about why he's come to the center to obtain this greater consciousness, and now is very interested in deciphering the powers of the blue crystal. And it's all a revenge plot to get back at some company men that I think fired him or embarrassed him or something. It's work stuff. That's what he's here for. But, as he's telling Barnes all this, Tommy reaches into Lupton's window and snatches the crystal off his desk. The spider then makes a deal with Lupton, help her overthrow her queen on Metebelis 3. By the way, the queen is separate from the Great One. There's the Great One, who is like their god, and there's the queen that runs everything on the planet in a physical sense. But if he helps her overthrow the queen on Metebelis 3, she will help him gain power on Earth. Now, Tommy attempts to give Sarah Jane the crystal, but after she sees Lupton go into the cellar to transport himself to Metebelis 3, she basically tells Tommy, I don't have time for this, I'll talk to you later. And she follows and basically stands on Lupton's mandala that he uses in these incantations, and is then, as she's calling to the doctor and Mike, they witness her also teleport away. There she meets the humans of Metebelis 3, who live as slaves in these primitive villages. And on Metebelis 3, they toil for the quote-unquote 8 legs, which are the spiders. That's what they call them there. And the people are referred to as quote-unquote 2 legs by the spiders. In fact, spiders later proves to be like a slur. The spiders don't like hearing that term. But basically everybody here are descendants of humans who came here to colonize the planet. The Doctor gives chase in the TARDIS and arrives on Metebelis 3, and he finds Sarah Jane, but she's due to be arrested by the Queen of the Eight Legs. And while he resists also being arrested for questioning, he fights off the guards, but Sarah Jane escapes. But it turns out the Queen's human guards also have been given powers granted them by the spiders themselves, and the Doctor's hit with those electrical bolts as he tries to return to the TARDIS. So, during this whole hubbub of Sarah Jane and the Doctor, the Queen and her guards were looking for a guy who is building a resistance against the Eight Legs. This guy's father sacrificed himself to be taken by the Queen for a crime that Eric, the son and resistant leader, had committed. And so this guy is to be taken to the lair of the Eight Legs to serve as food. They do leave the Doctor believing him to be dead, but Sarah Jane convinces Eric to hide the Doctor while they also hide her through the night. And the Doctor delivers a message to Sarah Jane in a barely lucid state, telling her that there's this machine that he's got in a leather satchel inside the TARDIS that will save him. She finds it, but is ultimately captured by Lupton, but she left the satchel on the ground next to the TARDIS, which gives Eric the chance to get it and bring it to the Doctor, where he uses it, and it does something basically to revive him. And on Earth, Tommy ends up accidentally looking into the crystal, which more or less awakens his wit and intelligence, allowing him to go from reading very basic, like children's picture books to help kids learn how to read, to moments later reading William Blake poetry. In addition, Yates tries to confront Lupton's guys, but they jump him and tie him up. More on that in a little bit. But on Metebelis 3, Eric's father and Sarah Jane are wrapped up to be food for the Eight Legs, and both Sarah Jane and the Doctor learn from various people. The Doctor learned from Eric, while Sarah Jane learns from Eric's father, that the spiders came with the humans from Earth. A ship they must have been on crashed in a part of the planet full of the blue Metebelis crystals. They became smarter and smarter and bigger until they could physically and mentally dominate the two legs. The Doctor does discover something that can absorb and block the powers of the Eight Legs and their guards, the powers they possess. There's certain rocks that kind of act, I guess, oppositely to the blue crystals that empower them. And he gives them to Eric to use as defense against the Eight Legs as he begins his revolution. But as he attempts to rescue Eric's father and Sarah Jane, the Doctor's captured by the Queen's guards. Now, the Doctor gets wrapped up like Eric's father and Sarah Jane, like they're going to be, he even comments that he knows what it feels like to be the fly in the web. That's how they're basically being prepared for food. But the Doctor explains that Eric is organizing some of the other humans in various villages to rebel against the Queen. Now, two guards come to free Sarah Jane and take her to the Queen while the Doctor wiggles his way out of his webbing. So Sarah Jane's talking to the Queen, who says that she needs Sarah Jane's help because she does not agree with the Council's plan of invading Earth. And Sarah Jane is kind of savvy to the idea that the Queen only wants to free her and the Doctor so that they can be the ones to obtain the blue crystal for her. Now, the Queen says that all life on Metebelis 3 is in danger if they don't get that crystal. So Sarah Jane agrees to help. So right now we have Lupton trying to convince the Council of Eight Legs to overthrow the Queen. We have the Queen seemingly going against the Council herself, trying to win Sarah Jane and the Doctor over to her side. On Earth, Mike Yates convinces Lupton's pals to try the incantation again with his help so that he can save Sarah Jane. So there's all sorts of plots and plans a-cooking here. Now, after hearing something about Lupton and the cellar, Tommy begins to remember something that Sarah Jane told her earlier when she chased after Lupton. So he goes to see Choji for help. Meanwhile, the Doctor comes face to, voice of the Great One herself. And she warns him to not take another step into her cave, or his body will be destroyed cell by cell by the rays of all of the other blue crystals in this cave. And when he attempts to refuse to retrieve the blue crystal and bring it to her, the Great One teaches the Doctor a lesson of what her powers are by forcing him to basically physically step around in circles, showing that, yeah, she can very easily control anyone who comes near her, basically. Realizing how much power she has, she begins sensing great fear in the Doctor's mind. Fear he's never experienced before. Back on Earth, Lupton's pals start the incantation, providing additional spiders to be able to teleport to Earth, where they begin appearing and attaching themselves to some of the other guys down there. After Tommy tells Choji about the shenanigans in the basement, the llama goes to the cellar, where he runs into a giant spider that strikes him down with those electrical powers. And Mike Yates is also struck down by that same spider. Now, Sarah Jane and the Doctor reunite, where she tells him that they are going to escape. She takes his hands and teleports him outside by the TARDIS, where she tells a confused Doctor that the Queen taught her how to do that. That doesn't seem very suspicious whatsoever, now does it? Now they get back to Earth, where Lupton's men attempt to attack the duo, but Tommy saves them by being able to basically resist the electric beams. It's later said that it's his innocence that shields him. When Mike is struck, he's not killed by their immense powers because of his desire to be to help Sarah Jane and to help save her and the Doctor. So his pureness of heroism saves him, while Tommy's saved by his innocence. They go to Kanpo, where the Doctor soon discovers he's talking to his old mentor. And as the two of them discuss this blue crystal the Doctor stole from Metebelis 3, Lupton's men attempt to kill Tommy guarding Kanpo's room. Now, as the Doctor discusses how he really cannot give the spiders the blue crystals with his old mentor, Sarah Jane is curiously listening in on the conversation and not at all looking suspicious. But when Kanpo reveals that Tommy brought him the crystal because it quote-unquote cured Tommy, Sarah Jane demands to be given the crystal. And it's revealed that the Queen herself has attached herself to Sarah Jane. Now, the Doctor and Kanpo use the blue crystal to separate the Queen from Sarah Jane and free her mind from the spider's control. And when the Queen is defeated, she dies. Now, Kanpo and the Doctor explain how Kanpo is another Time Lord who regenerated and came to Earth after deciding that the Time Lord's ways were not his. By the way, this is also the very first time the term regeneration is used as to what Time Lords do when they change their physical looks and their personalities. So there's something for you trivia nerds out there. He also says that Choji is a projection of himself. Now, we'll get back around to that in just a moment, but Kanpo tells the Doctor that there is no other way to defeat the Great One but to give her what she wants. He knows her lair and collective power of the crystals will basically destroy the Doctor, but Kanpo is able to help teleport the Doctor to the cellar to get in the TARDIS, while Lupton's crew, all under control of other spiders, consolidate their powers to finally knock Tommy out and get into the room. They deliver a powerful blast to more or less quote-unquote kill Kanpo, who then regenerates into the visage of Choji. So I guess that's what he means by him being a projection of himself. He's projecting a future version of himself to everybody else. But when the Doctor arrives on Metebelis 3, he discovers Eric's rebellion was defeated by the spiders, and they all basically now serve the Eight Legs, and they take the Doctor to the Council. Now, he says that he will only deliver the blue crystal to the Great One herself, even though he knows that this will ultimately destroy him. he's got to do this because it's kind of his fault as he sees it. Now he goes to the cave where he discovers one very giant spider sitting under a web of blue crystals, exponentially expanding her telepathic and telekinetic powers. She plans to basically broadcast her consciousness out into the universe and basically take over everything. The Doctor tries to warn her that she will not be able to expand her powers by infinity because it will basically create this feedback loop and turn itself back onto her and destroy her. But she doesn't listen and takes the crystal, completing her quote-unquote perfect web of crystals. And as the Doctor predicted, there is indeed a feedback loop that ultimately destroys her and all of the spiders of Metabulus 3. The Doctor escapes and returns to the TARDIS, but the damage is already done. 3 weeks later, Sarah Jane waits in the Doctor's lab. He's been missing now this whole time, and both she and the Brigadier are kind of unsure of what his fate is, although the Brigadier says he once didn't see the Doctor for months, and the next time he saw him, he had a completely different face and personality. So he has faith that he will return. But finally, the TARDIS rematerializes and the Doctor stumbles out and falls to the floor. He tells Sarah Jane that the TARDIS got lost in the time vortex, but eventually piloted herself back home to Earth. And as the Doctor slowly dies, he tells Sarah Jane that he had to face his fears. And he also tries to tell her to not shed a tear, but he dies as he wipes away the tear rolling down her eye. Kanpo, now much younger than before, appears and tells Sarah Jane that the Brigadier that he will give the Doctor's next regeneration a small push. And as he fades away, the Doctor begins to change into a new man. Now let's talk about 3 things that I like about Planet of the Spiders. First, this is one of the early instances of the Doctor talking about his past. He tells the Brigadier about a monk that lived in the mountains behind his house when he was a young lad. Now, presumably, this is his childhood on Gallifrey. He talks about what he learned from the monk about looking into his own mind. Presumably, this was to teach him how to work through problems, center himself to be able to focus and come to conclusions, etc. And I'll have a little bit more to say about the overall mood of the serial, particularly when we get into the last couple of episodes of the story itself. But there's this contemplative and almost melancholy remembrance of his old teacher. Presumably, the Doctor hadn't thought about him in hundreds of years. And as he looks into the crystal, which is tying everything together, he's suddenly reminded of the old man he learned a great deal from. And everything from the spiders to Joe to Mike Yates to the mysterious abbot at the meditation center to the Doctor's own mortality and fears intersect here. And it gets the Doctor to be more introspective than he had for a great deal of his 5-year run. This does feel like a culmination of this whole era of Doctor Who tied directly to the Third Doctor. And he's the one who goes into these memories of his past as he prepares for his final showdown that ultimately, quote unquote, kills him. Now, it seems like a line kind of out of nowhere about this old man he would listen to for hours on end, but it's the first step towards facing his own quote unquote death. Now, naturally, I say death and kills metaphorically because we all know the Doctor doesn't die. He regenerates, but he effectively becomes somebody different. All those thoughts and memories still exist, but he's going to go in a new direction. So when a Doctor regenerates, that older version of himself does seemingly die and faces a final test for that version of himself. It's something about this episode that I always kind of get caught up thinking about, probably longer than I should, and especially that stuff about him thinking back to his childhood, which the Doctor, even in the present day, and even after the continuity changing stuff of the Timeless Children and the all of that stuff, all that stuff is not often talked about. We always just think of him as this kind of older person all the time. I'll talk a little bit more about this general mood here in just a moment. But next, half of episode 2 of this serial is that kind of crazy land, air, sea chase. It's totally unnecessary. It's totally silly to see all these gadgets at play like this is out of a James Bond movie. And it definitely plays into the common critique of the serial being a tad too long. But I cannot care less. Pertwee's third Doctor was suave. He was a gadget guy, constantly using a sonic screwdriver or tinkering away in his lab. His first season often found him tinkering with Bessie to make it just right for himself while he was earthbound so he could drive around. One of the most common comparisons this era and Pertwee's demeanor as the Doctor drew was how much like the early 70s Bond films the action and gadgetry was in this era of Doctor Who. Being a big Bond fan myself, I'm sure it was a major part as to why this is my favorite Doctor. Still, I love this bit, this whole stuff that's going on here. There's the totally gobsmacked constable that was chasing all the cars who gets a cheeky laugh at the end of, his involvement by saying that he's going to take the rest of the day off because he no longer feels well enough to work. And there's a vagabond that the Doctor runs over with the hovercraft only for him to get up and look on with astonishment. Both of these things were very Roger Moore era 70s Bond in style. If Pertwee's Doctor is going to be compared to Bond, then damn it, I love that he really gets to go out with these chases and the very Bond feel of this, of the first half of this episode. Now, lastly, the final two parts of the serial are surprisingly somber for this era, but I think in a really good way. So kind of going back to my first like here, I mentioned earlier that the Doctor was suddenly reminded of an old teacher and friend that he knew growing up on Gallifrey. Well, naturally that came back in the form of this mysterious Abbot Conpo. But in episode 5, this Doctor has an existential crisis, the likes of which hadn't really been seen, especially in his time as the Doctor, and as far as the third Doctor goes. And sure, the first and second Doctors had their moments of fright and so forth, but not just for Pertwee's run, but I think the existential crisis is something that had not really been seen at all in the first 11 years of the series. And he encounters a power great enough to make anything he has, including his own immeasurable willpower, seem like small fries. I mean, the third Doctor was up against all sorts of crazy stuff, and he even faced the Daleks 3 times. But this was the one time that he was really written to be terrified of something. He didn't know he was about to face a spider the size of an apartment building, which would terrify me, like on an existential level. He just knew whatever was in that cave was powerful enough to conquer an entire planet easily, and lived in a place that would have enough radiation that it will, not could or might, will shred the Doctor's body's cells to the point that he's not going to survive this. When discussing this with his friend, the normally sure Doctor realizes he's to blame for all of this that's happened. He didn't find the crystal the Great One wanted. He stole it from Metebelis 3. He has to come to terms with his actions, that his actions do have a butterfly effect. He often said and did things throughout this third incarnation that showed a kind of little regard for others around him. He wasn't so much full of himself as much as he was taking out his frustrations on everyone, because he's kind of now living with all these decisions that humanity, and at times worse, UNIT, were making. And it was building problems that he had to solve himself. Now, it was something he created that only had one solution, which was the sacrifice of his life. Yes, he would regenerate, and I think he knew that anyway, but this was the last adventure in both the physical and metaphorical senses. And it played out very well. I mean, these last 2 parts of the serial always came off to me as somber and had a little extra weight to them that I appreciated even as a kid. And I think it's a really good cap on a very good era of classic Doctor Who. Now, in early 1974, after the 11th season was already starting to air, Pertwee announced that he was stepping away from the role. Now, at the time, he stated he wanted to return to the stage. I mean, he was starring in a play called The Bedwinner at the time, and he also stated a concern over being typecast as a character like the Doctor. After all, he had been in the role longer at this point than his two predecessors, and by the end of the 11th season, he was the Doctor for nearly half of the entire existence of the series itself. However, there are also various statements made by Elizabeth Sladen, who played Sarah Jane, who said that Pertwee asked for a substantial raise to return for the 12th season, and it was denied, so he left. And there were also concerns about his lacking interest in playing the Doctor and a nagging back issue causing constant pain. Whether or not any of these things are true, later in life Pertwee would tell interviewers that the death of his dear friend Roger Delgado would be the event that led him to decide it might be time to step aside. And the final game was not... Oh, my interpretation of it. Now, let me take a step back here. My interpretation of what I'm about to say is not something that you sometimes hear on other stations. Like I know Who Culture had stated that the final game was his final episode, but that's not my impression. So let me just say this. I don't think the final game was meant to be the exit of Pertwee. In fact, the Master would sacrifice himself to save the Doctor. So that's an interesting angle too, because that would have completed an arc for the villainous character. So because of the missing story of the final game, the Master would go on to become a major villain late in the 4th and all the way throughout the 5th Doctor's eras. But I'm still not sure that the final game was meant to be Pertwee's exit. I think it was only meant to be Roger Delgado's exit, but I could be wrong on that. But naturally, Pertwee would return for the 20th anniversary special, The Five Doctors. In fact, he got lots to do in that story and reunited with Sladen's Sarah Jane. But what would become of Doctor Who, no matter how much more popular Pertwee made the series due to the action-first style of his characterization of the role, is the stuff of, honestly, international legend. His regeneration into Tom Baker's 4th Doctor and Baker and Sladen's partnership on the series would widely be known as the single greatest era of Doctor Who ever. There are still a couple of more 3rd Doctor stories that I could take a look at, and a whole lot of episodes of the 4th Doctors to look at. So I've got a feeling that there are still some opportunities to talk classic Doctor Who, probably in the near future. But that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday at filmseizure.com. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You can also subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure podcast and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers, as well as YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieenema.com, to read new review articles every Friday morning. Next time, it's back to proper movies and the first pairing of Tim Burton and Michael Keaton. Yep, it's the movie whose name is thrice as nice, Beetlejuice. So until next week, stay spooky.